I'm Tiffany Pascal, and I welcome you to Think on These Things with Tiff. This is a podcast within my online ministry, Every Single One of Us, in which I will share inspiring messages through the wisdom of Scripture, thought-provoking discussions, personal testimonies, and prayer. Join me on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time to tune in. Whether you join us live or catch the replay, it's my hope and prayer that each message will encourage and empower you to live your best life in Christ Jesus. I also want to invite you to join our community's time of prayer. It's called Effectual Fervent Prayer, and it's live weekly on Mondays at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. Before we start, be sure to subscribe to this channel to get notifications about new videos and to stay up to date on what's happening within our Every Single One of Us community. Now we're all set to think on these things with Tiff. Let's go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Think on These Things with Tiff. I hope you all have had a great and wonderful day. I certainly have. Again, so grateful for the opportunity just to come before you guys and to be able to share the things that fall upon my heart to share. So with that being said, boundaries. That's the topic for tonight, boundaries. And I really, again, I'm very thoughtful. First and foremost, I'm very thoughtful about the topics that I cover. I'm prayerful about the topics that I cover. And when things drop into my spirit to cover, that's what I share. And so I don't, just share things for the sake of sharing things, but I really try to share things that I feel are really meaningful, would be meaningful for the people in this group, and things that I feel are very God-led. And so that's the topic of boundaries, because I feel that it's very important and key to touch on those. Good evening for everyone that would join, and a big thank you in advance for everyone that would join and catch the replay later. So on the topics of boundaries, there's kind of three areas that I want to touch on tonight. One of them being emotional boundaries, the next being physical boundaries, and then I just want to kind of, throw out some words of wisdom that dropped in my spirit as I was thinking about this topic. And so, first and foremost, there's a lot that can be said when you think about boundaries in general. There's a lot that can be said with that. Even taking it further and thinking about emotional boundaries and physical boundaries, I will not touch on everything that can be touched on, because we would be here a very, very long time. But it's a broad topic. It's an important topic, but I will just simply touch on the things that I feel specifically to touch on. But and maybe later I'll have a part 2 or something like that. But I just want to specifically touch on the things that I feel to touch on this evening. I don't suspect I'll be before you long, but we'll see what the Holy Spirit does. So one of the things I want to say right off and really admonish you to do is in dating. Learn this the hard way, I think many times over. But when dating, keep in the forefront of your mind, okay? You are not the person's spouse when you are dating. If you want to put an amen in the comments, you're certainly welcome to do that. But I will say that again. When dating, keep in the forefront of your mind that you are not that person's spouse yet. Okay, yeah, I see one amen. Can I get another? I'm kidding, but seriously, that is real. Keep in mind, you are not that person's main provision of spiritual, emotional, or physical intimacy. That is Jesus's job. I'm going to say it again because I think it's that important. You are not that person's main provision of spiritual, emotional, and physical intimacy. So keep that in mind. I know sometimes when we are in dating situations, and we've met somebody and we're excited, and we feel like we're ready for a relationship and we want it to work. Sometimes if we're not careful, we will allow that excitement and just desire for that relationship to kind of manage our emotions, and therefore the decisions that we make. But I think I can remember the conversation that I had with Elder Wanda when she was saying, be careful not to give someone you're dating like spouse benefits. That's real. That's real. And that, because that happens a lot, and that's a whole nother something that we can talk about. But again, keep in mind that you are not that person's spouse. And so you really should govern yourself accordingly with that. Emotional boundaries. Let's talk about it. Emotional boundaries are very important to have, because when you don't have them, you can find yourself very vulnerable and susceptible to getting in too deep, too fast. And by the way, while I'm having this conversation, if you feel to put anything in the comments, if you have any questions, or if you just want to, mention things in the comments based on your personal experience, you're welcome to do so. But again, having and establishing healthy boundaries is key. Because if you do not have them, have you heard it said, well, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything? Well, that's kind of how I look at boundaries, in a sense. Like, if you don't have a boundary, it just opens you up and makes you susceptible and vulnerable to different things. And so without those being established, it can be very easily to get in too deep too quickly. Okay. With that being said, you guys know that a lot of times I talk to you from personal experience, because that's my ministry was birthed out of my personal experience. And so a lot of what I tend to talk about, God gives me to share the things that I've gone through in order to help someone else. And so I can very openly say that for me, being a person all of my life that's been a person that's been driven by my emotions and led by my emotions a lot. I have found this to be an area that I was not successful, and now that I'm more kind of that's more in the forefront of my mind, I have to purposely be diligent in this area, because for me, and I don't know if you feel the same. If you do, you can let me know. But now in my later years in life, I'm more of a communicator. I love having thoughtful communication. That communicating is a way of connection for me, and that's important for me. But because I've been a person that's been emotionally driven a lot of my life, which isn't necessarily a great thing to be when you let it override wisdom at times, but because I've been so emotionally driven, this has been an area in which I've had to be especially diligent, because I like to connect with people. I love to communicate with people. And so when I didn't have those boundaries established, I was more easily drawn in, and really found myself at different times getting in too deep too fast. And so that is something to be mindful of. As your relationship grows in length, then it can begin to grow in depth. Okay, I'll say that again. As your relationship grows in length, then it can begin to grow in depth. What do they say? Don't put the cart before the horse. Exactly. And so just and it's a fine balance, right? You don't want to be so emotionally guarded and blocked up that you prevent yourself from making a connection, right? But you don't want to be so loose either that you're just easily, receiving and accepting in, and not pacing yourself, and you're losing, control. And with your emotions is what I'm trying to say. And so there's kind of that balance, okay? And so what I would say in relation to emotional boundaries is some things to keep in mind is be careful about what you share about yourself early on. And again, if any of you want to comment, if you've had any, situations, or if you want to comment about what you've learned by doing too much too fast, you're welcome to put that in there. Or if there are things that you have found to be helpful for you in establishing emotional boundaries, again, feel free to put that in the chat. But again, be mindful of what you share about yourself early on. Okay, you don't want to go into it, day one and two, just sharing everything. And I know it can kind of seem laughable, right? But I mean, it's a very real thing. Because again, remember, a lot of times we go into these situations, some of us, maybe we haven't dated in a while, we go out on a date, we're excited, we want to, make an impression, put our best foot forward, we want to be, we want the person to feel that we're open and accessible. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we can find ourselves sharing more than what needs to be shared. And so be thoughtful and prayerful about, what you share early on. Okay. The person doesn't need to know everything about your past on date one. Somebody said in the chat, and I apologize, I can't see your name, but I had to learn that lesson. Yes, I had to learn that lesson too, because what happens? Well, somebody answer this question for me. What do you think you run the risk of happening if you share too much too soon? That's my question. What do you run the risk of happening if you share too much too soon? Okay, think about it. If you go into a situation, you're sharing, your whole past, your whole life story, your testimony, your traumas and all that. And, you're doing this in week one, God forbid, what were to happen then if somehow you don't stay connected with that person? Things are starting off maybe really good, and so you feel like you can share, and then what happens, week two, something changes and it goes to the left. Then, you're in a situation where, you shared intimately with another person that, you're no longer connected with, and that can leave you feeling, stung, hurt, vulnerable, and all of that. And so again, be mindful of what you share about yourself early on. They don't need to know, everything about you on day one. Okay. Also, I would say be careful about the topics that you talk about early on when you're dating somebody. Be careful about the topics. What comes to my mind is, having in-depth conversation about sex. Okay, this is just one example, right? But thinking about that, if you really think about it, you would understand why it's probably not the wisest thing to get into that. I think, based on where you are in a relationship, you guys are engaged or whatever, I think it's healthy to have conversations like that. But having those conversations early on, there's no, any type of commitment or anything like that. Those things can stir up emotions and therefore stir up an emotional tie and connection, right? And so in relation to that too, I would say, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, it says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. And so again, be mindful of the topics that you talk about. Sex isn't the only one, but there's other things, that perhaps should not be talked about, very early on in the relationship. Another thing I would say, as far as just to be mindful of, is having conversations late at night, texting someone late at night. I would say, just to kind of guard yourself and be careful about that, because when you think about it, the later on in the evening it gets, typically the more tired we get, the more weary we get, the more our guard can come down if we're not careful. And so again, I would say, a healthy way of keeping an emotional boundary set is just being mindful of when you're connecting with the person, either physically seeing them face to face, or when you're talking to them. Had to learn this the hard way too. Sometimes when you're talking to somebody, when you're feeling all lovey-dovey about somebody, you want to talk to them all the time, right? But be mindful of the hours that you're entertaining, conversations, because when the tendency is sometimes, when it gets later in the evening and you're getting into 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, you're tired, the other person's probably tired. Again, that guard is typically going down, and I think you make yourself kind of more susceptible to kind of get into those conversations that you should not get into. And so again, that's one thing I would say. All of these things and more. Again, I'm not covering every single thing that I could cover, but all of these things and more can create an emotional tie too soon. Okay. And again, when that connection is made too soon, before you've had the relationship has been proven and tested, and that person, you've really gotten to know them more and things like that, and you guys go deeper into the relationship, having that tie too soon can be detrimental. Having that emotional tie, it can put us in our feelings. And we all know when we get in our feelings and our emotions, sometimes we don't make the wisest choices, or sometimes our flesh can try to override and take over, our spirits if we're not careful. So that's what I wanted to say with emotional boundaries. The next thing I want to talk about is physical boundaries. Okay. When you think about physical boundaries, again, physical boundaries should be set up front. Would you all agree? When you're dating somebody in a dating situation, physical boundaries should be set up front. And if you care to put in the comments why you feel like that's a good idea, But I think it's very, very important when you go into that situation. We all know as Christians that sex is reserved for marriage, and so it's important to establish those boundaries right away to set the relationship up for success, and to let the person know very clearly, matter of factly, these are my beliefs. This is kind of my expectation. This is what I'm comfortable with. It's important to let a person know that right away. Number one, to give them an opportunity to either be on board or not, right? And another thing I want to say is don't assume because the other person is saying that they're a Christian that you two are perfectly aligned when it comes to physical boundaries and what you're comfortable with, okay? Don't assume that. And so it's important to, again, get it all out on the table sooner rather than later, and find out, let the person know where you are with it and find out where they are with it, and just let them know, hey, I'm not for sex before marriage. You would I was going to say you would be surprised, but you might not be surprised. I was going to say you would be surprised, but you might not be surprised at how many people profess Christianity, but are all good and all systems go with having sex before marriage. And so I literally, I personally have known some men who didn't profess to be Christians that had more of a moral compass than some men that I have met that said they were. And so again, you can't assume because they are professing Christianity that you two are aligned and on the same page in relation to physical boundaries. So get it all out up front is what I'm trying to say, and then let them decide. They either want to be on board or they're not going to be on board, and if they don't want to be on board, then that is time saved, right? No need in wasting time. Another thing I want to say in relation to physical boundaries is to be aware of the situations that you're putting yourself in. Really try to avoid tempting situations. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean by if you're dating someone, perhaps you've been dating for a while and you're thinking about going on a romantic trip, or you've been dating for a while. You're over their house later in the evening. Maybe you get tired and you're thinking, oh, I can just we can just sleep in the same bed and nothing will happen, or you know what I'm saying, things like that. Be mindful of situations that you're putting yourself in, because you can set your own self up. Sometimes we put ourselves in situations and we feel like, okay, I'm feeling super strong. Well, what if the other person is not? You know what I'm saying? Like, and sometimes we set ourselves up and we think we're stronger than we really are, and there's just no need to just kind of even tempt yourself that way. Okay, ask me how I know. I could tell stories, okay? Thinking like I'm going into a situation like, oh, this will be just fine. And then, temptation smacks you in the face. And then, you're going through all these changes where if you had not put yourself in the situation in the first place, then it would have been a lot easier for both of you. And so, sometimes in situations when you're in a dating relationship, sometimes you're feeling super strong, spiritually, and the other person may not, or it can be vice versa. And so again, you just have to be mindful of the situations that you're putting yourself in when you're in a dating situation. And more thought in relation to that is, I know some people have the mindset, okay, so we can't have sex before marriage. Okay, I'm cool, can't have sex. But I've had men that I've told that to, and they're like, okay, so we can't have sex. What can we do? Right? Okay. And so it's like, excuse me, like it should never be a thing of how far can we take this, right? If I'm saying that I love God and I'm saved and I'm a Christian, and you're saying that you love God and you're saved, our desire should be to be pleasing to God and to honor him, correct? And so if that is the goal, the question is not how far can we go before we cross a line. The question is, how much do I want to honor God? How much do I want to please him? And is what I'm thinking about doing, is what we're deciding to do or not do, is it going to honor God? That's what you should govern your dating behavior by. Is this going to honor God? Is there potential in any of this to be displeasing to God? Is there potential in any of this to cause temptation or lead somebody down a wrong path. So think about those things. So now, with that being said, again, there's so much more that I could cover, but again, we would be here a long, long time. I just want to touch on the things that dropped in my spirit to touch on. So with that being said, I want to kind of move on to just words of wisdom that I have to share. And so I feel like it was earlier in this week, maybe it was earlier in this week or maybe last week, that I put a post in the group where there was a minister talking about finding out right away if that person's involved with Jesus Christ, right? So that's important when you're considering who you're dating. Let that be one of the things that you find out right away. And here's the thing. You can have, because I've had this happen where a person, I'll ask them, well, do you serve God? And they can say yes. Don't let it stop there. Find out what God they're serving, because you guys, we're in a day and time where people will say, they know God or they're serving God, and it comes to find out they're serving in some strange God, not the one and only living God. So we need to take it beyond, do you know God? Are you serving God? Well, I want to know, what God do you know? Okay, that's what. Are we talking about the God, Father God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Like, are we talking about that God, or what God are we talking about? Because you guys, we're in a day and time where people are out here in it and serving all kinds of idols and false gods and all of that. So you need to take it a step further and ask them, what God are they serving, right? And really ask them, about their relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, I have kind of a laughable moment I want to share. I was in a conversation with my coach, I feel like it was last month. And we kind of got on the topic of this, right? And so I was sharing with her that when I go into a dating situation, at some point, pretty soon, and getting to know this person, I'll typically ask, well, are you saved? Right? I'll just be like, hey, are you saved? And she kind of chuckled, and I remember her telling me, just giving me a different way to approach that. And so she was suggesting, what you could say is, what was your conversion experience like? How was it like when you gave your life to the Lord? Can you talk to me about that experience? So that's just kind of another way of posing it. And so I kind of chuckled, because I can tend to be kind of direct. I'm like, hey, excuse me. Do you know God? Are you saved, brother? Are you saved? Have you been baptized? I want to know, right? And so I just kind of chuckled, because I thought, well, that is kind of a different way to ask it, but still get at the same thing. So remember, I told you, because somebody told me, right? You can ask them, what was your experience like when you gave your life to Christ? So that's kind of a very lovely, gentle way that's still getting at the same thing versus, are you saved? But hey, that works too. I mean, I was getting it out the way, right? So at any rate, be sure that they have a relationship with Christ. Another thing I would say too is take your time. Take your time. Take your time. Take your time. I don't know where this is coming from, but evidently I want you to know it's important to take your time, right? Take your time. It's not a race, this dating thing, right? You found somebody, you're interested in them. What is the rush, right? What is the rush? Take your time. Why? Again, because this will help you in establishing, that emotional boundary. It will help you to protect yourself emotionally. It gives you time to learn the person, right? I've heard this said, and I completely agree, that you need to take the time to be able to observe the person in various situations, right? I want to know, how you act when you're upset. I want to know, how you act when things don't go your way, in good situations and bad situations. You want to be able to have time to observe that person in various situations, right? You can't do that overnight. Like, that takes time, right? And so take the time that you need. And another thing I would say is, don't let someone take you beyond the pace that you're comfortable with in the relationship, right? And so, you're going into a relationship and your mind is set, hey, I just want to take my time with this. I'm in no rush, and maybe you express this to the person and you find that they, are wanting to take things, faster, maybe take up all of your time, or maybe they get very emotional very, very quickly. Be mindful of that. I'm not saying that legitimate feelings are on some scheduled timeline, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying be mindful that you're not allowing another person to take you faster emotionally than you're prepared to go, right? If it feels unnatural for you, if you start to kind of feel rushed, that is a good indication that, perhaps the pacing of it is beyond what you're comfortable with, and then you need to take a step back or just communicate with the person that, hey, this is going a little bit, quickly. I'm kind of not as comfortable, and have that conversation with them so that it can be slowed down a bit and you can go at a pace that's comfortable for you. Okay. That leads me into kind of something that I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about love bombing, but I've heard of that, and it kind of dropped in my spirit to talk about that. And so I hadn't heard a lot of it. I hadn't really heard of it before, this year. And so, but it's a real thing. And so I wanted to kind of touch on that. Love bombing, that's what it's called. And love bombing is a manipulation technique that's used most often by narcissistic people. Okay. We know a narcissist, those are people who have an excessive interest or admiration of themselves, right? So love bombing is when, a narcissistic person, they kind of bomb you with affection, right? Excessive attention, and gifts to kind of lure you in, right? To lure you in very early. And they're doing it in a in kind of a negative way. Now, this is what I will say. Not everybody that, shows you attention, and things like that, am I saying is love bombing? No. But I'm saying, be mindful of and be prayerful about this, because there are some people that are doing it with the intention to manipulate you, right? They want to put you in a situation where that they make you open you up to being very, very vulnerable, and kind of put you in a situation where you're super susceptible to them. And so it can start off very, very lovely, right? Very, very lovely. And then those type of people, it's like it goes to the left, right? They're love bombing you to get you vulnerable and to seek control. And then it can just start going to the left. And that can be very, very damaging to you. So again, be mindful of manipulation and people wanting to manipulate you. Okay. Another thing I would say is, and I've touched, I think I had a whole teaching on being unequally yoked with somebody. So when we think about being equally yoked, what I want to say is because they are a fellow believer does not mean that you are equally yoked. Okay. I can remember a time, when I was younger, that I just was like, okay, if they're a Christian, good, we're all good. But that's not necessarily the case. Because you're two Christians do not mean that you're necessarily altogether equally yoked. There's a lot that can be said about that, but just you two being believers is not the whole picture when it comes to being equally yoked with somebody. You two can be two Christians and have different, values, in a lot of ways. And so it's important to just, go beyond, okay, this person is, a Christian, so we're equally yoked. But these are the things that you find out when you take time. So again, take your time. And the last thing I want to say is that we teach people how to treat us, right? When I think about boundaries, it's very important, again, to establish healthy boundaries. There's nothing wrong with establishing boundaries. And when you do that, you are teaching, in essence, the other person how to treat you. You are letting them know what's important to you. You are letting them know kind of, hey, this is where I'm at with it. And you're setting that expectation right away for them, so they have an understanding of, of what you desire and what your mindset is. And so again, we teach people how to treat us. And sometimes when we don't have these boundaries set, sometimes people, feel like they can inevitably sometimes start crossing lines and boundaries and things like that. And then you have to kind of deal with it. You have to kind of deal with it on the flip side. So it's better, again, to establish these boundaries very early on and set the expectation very early on, so that you don't, get further in the relationship than trying to establish boundaries that should have been established very, very early on. And so again, we teach people how to treat us, right? And so they will learn by what we tolerate and what we accept. And so again, it's important to set that healthy boundary with somebody and set that expectation. Okay. And with that being said, that is all I have. I will let you all go. Have a very, very good evening. Until next time.